Please welcome Greg Driskell. He's the president and founder of Professional Pavement Products. He has over 20 years of industry experience, first as a contractor, then as a supplier. He's very hands-on with the development of our Medallion product line of traffic paints and pavement maintenance products and the selection of our over 700 products that PPP currently carries. He's active in several trade associations, including the American Traffic Safety Services Association and its foundation, the American Public Works Association, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, Traffic Engineers, the Transportation Research Board, American Road and Transportation Builders Association, and a few others there. Over the course of his career, Greg has been selected to instruct several LTAP and DOT training courses, and he's presented at several industry trade shows on various topics of pavement maintenance and pavement markings, roadway safety, and retroreflectivity. So without further ado, please welcome Greg Driskell.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for attending. We have attendees coming in from pretty much all over the place, from Virginia, Georgia, Arkansas, Texas, Wisconsin, Idaho, Iowa, Ohio, Tennessee, that's Tennessee, Kentucky, my home state, welcome, Colorado, Washington, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and I believe we have one or two coming in from Brazil. So I want to welcome everyone here, and I appreciate you coming in and trusting me with your time, and I believe that by the end of this webinar you should have a little more knowledge of what you're working with regards to traffic paint. At least that's my hopes. I do see that about 44% of you, which this is an unusually high number, about 44% of you consider yourself at an advanced level. I know a lot, but I'm still learning. And that's exactly what I want to press here. I do have 21 years in the pavement maintenance and marking industry, 16 as professional pavement products. Before that, I was not just into supply, but actually a contractor that applied pavement markings and both thermo and paint as well. So I have a lot of years of experience. I'm involved in a lot of development of product and so forth, but the end thing here is that I'm like you. I'm advanced. I know a lot, but I have a lot to learn. So every day I seek out ways to learn things myself. So if there's a question in the end that I can't answer, I'm going to be very frank with you, let you know I can't answer it, and I will find out the answer, because obviously if you've asked it, then it's probably something I should know as well. So we'll get started. And this is, of course, Pavement Markings 101. And this is regarding paint. We actually have a Pavement Markings 102 for thermoplastic as well. We have a pavement maintenance webinar. We have a weather webinar with regards to pavement maintenance and markings and how it's affected by the weather. So we have multiple. We have retroreflectivity webinars and so forth. But again, this focus is on traffic paint. Our presentations have very specific objectives. We want this to be real training, and what I mean by real is we want it to be relevant to the needs and the interests of the audience. That's why we give so much detail on what's going to be covered on the presentation beforehand. We want to make sure that the right people are here. The second thing is that it needs to be effective and useful for field application. I don't want to provide you with a bunch of chemical jargon that is really becomes useless out in the field application, because that's really what this is about. This is about understanding the paint so that when you use it out in the field, you know what you're doing, you can identify the issues and identify the solutions. A, for accurate information. This information that we are going to share with you today is either industry specific, it's from experience, from our education in the materials. So this information is accurate information. Obviously, that's a goal of ours, is to make sure it's as accurate as possible. So anything that I said here or say here, I should have backup for, and you can call me on that. Now, for logical content level, as I said, we've got 44% of you are saying you're at advanced level, and then I have about 4% of you that are at no knowledge, 24 at limited, 28 at average. So you can see the span of persons we have out there and their level of knowledge prior to this webinar. So what we try to do is make sure that this is logical content so that it can be carried across all those levels. The reason we do this, the reason we provide these presentations at no charge, is to promote quality practices. As a father of 3 teenage drivers now, improving safety for motorists is near and dear to my heart, along with pedestrians and the technicians that actually work out in the field. It's also to maintain product integrity. No matter how good of a product we build, either manufacturers, distributors, or developers, if it's not applied right, it's not going to function like we designed it. And lastly, of course, is to maintain industry integrity. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you a quick example. Years ago in the state of Florida, we were using thermoplastic. We still use thermoplastic, thank goodness, to this day. But what happened was the material wasn't being put down quite properly by some contractors, and the state started losing faith in the product because they thought that was the product failing, but it actually wasn't. It was an application related. Whether intentional or unintentional is not the point, but you know, industry integrity is really important. Traffic paints, waterborne traffic paints, which is the primary discussion today, are very good paints and should be taken very seriously as a lesser expensive, more economic alternative in pavement markings. So again, to improve safety of the motorists, pedestrians, and technicians, maintain the product integrity and the industry integrity. All right, let's take a look at what we have here. As I said earlier, I gave you the stats on your knowledge level, but you can see here that in this particular webinar, we've got about almost 54% are government agencies. We have at about 22.2% is pavement marking contractors, and about 13% is pavement maintenance contractors. How we divide those up is a marking contractor solely focuses on the pavement markings, whether it be paint, thermoplastic, any type of tapes, and so forth. Maintenance contractors are usually primarily paving, patching, seal coating, that type of thing. And then we have 10% other. That must be like my mother or something on there. Anyway, so let's see. Help us get an accurate count of how many people are out there today. If you could, there's a question box that's going to come up, and in your question box, if you could put how many people are sitting at your computer watching this today, it helps us with our statistical analysis, and also so we can send you a bill. No, just kidding. There's no charge for it. Doesn't matter how many people you have sitting around your computer. If you would just please fill that in, it really is going to help us to have a better idea of how much effect the webinar is having. Okay, so today's agenda: materials, application, inspection, tips, and tricks. We're going to talk about the materials, how they're made, what they're made of. We're going to talk about application, how to apply it, different methods of application. We're going to talk about inspection, how to inspect it once it's down, and we're going to talk about tips and tricks. And most of those tips and tricks actually came from you guys, things that some of you guys that have been out there doing some striping and you have some tips and tricks with others. Those are always really interesting. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is materials. If we can do an audience poll before we start, what best represents, sorry about that, let's go back. What best represents your pavement marking material mixes? And what I'm trying to find out here is how much of your markings do you use paint on? For instance, if you're using thermoplastic tapes or multi-component products, that type of thing, what percentage is a traffic paint? So if you 100%, that means you only use paint for your pavement marking. 75%, of course, 75% of your markings are in paint, and so forth. This will also help us to get to know the customer a little bit better. And I'll give you just a moment to respond to that poll. Okay. All right, next, we'll get that calculation here in a little bit. Material basics of traffic paint. There you go. All right, so most widely used material. Understand that traffic paint is the most widely used pavement marking material in the world. It's applied in a liquid form, and it's usually through a spray system, although some people try to do it manually, like with a roller or something in the small applications. But you have to be careful with that on today's paints because, unfortunately, they dry on the roller before you can get them down because of the fast dry process that they have. So spray systems is the application. Paint, and this is the difference between this and other products, is that a paint requires solely on a mechanical bond, which basically means that that it relies on the porousness of the surface to bond to that surface. To give you an example of something different, is a thermoplastic relies not only on a mechanical bond but also on a thermal bond. It actually melts into the surface. For paint, it lays on the surface and then grabs into any of the pits and the pores there is. So obviously, the smoother the surface, the less bonding will happen, and the rougher and more textured the surface, the more bonding will happen. That's a close-up image there. Let's look here. Application vehicle evaporates. Once the paint is sprayed, the application vehicle, we're going to talk about that in a moment, evaporates, and then you're left with the solid components onto the ground. It becomes what's called or considered a semi-durable marking. There are some advanced marking, advanced paints that we'll talk about in a few moments that more go along to the durable side, but a paint typically is considered a semi-durable marking. So again, most widely used, it comes in a liquid form, you spray it down, it mechanically bonds as the application vehicle evaporates. That's usually a water, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then the solid components remain, and then you've got a semi-durable marking. All right, next, 4 primary components. The 4 primary components of paint. First, we'll talk about pigment. It's either going to be yellow or white, red. It'll be the different pigment colors that we use in the paint, so it'll have a pigment, and that controls the color and also the opacity of the paint. And when we get into technical terms here in a moment, we'll cover what opacity means. Most of these color agents, these pigments, are like titanium dioxide for your white, and a lead or an organic yellow material pigment is used in your yellows. Titanium dioxide is used in both white and yellow, just so that you know, and that's really what's caused, in the past, has caused a lot of the volatileness of the pricing of paint, because TiO2 has been on the rise for quite a while. Then you have the binder, and the binder, or resin sometimes it's called, is what gives you adhesion and cohesion. Adhesion is the how well it sticks to the surface that you're applying it to, and cohesion is how well it bonds to itself. The resins that are typical are alkyd, oil-based, and acrylic. Fillers. Fillers add body. Pretty much everything that is made has some type of filler in it, and in this case, it's used. You either have some clays in it, some calcium carbonate, and so forth, to give body to the product. And then your application vehicle is what we were talking about a moment ago, that evaporates, and that's exactly what it does. It evaporates off of the material. All it is to do is to transport the solids and give the solids a chance to do their to create the bonding, and then evaporates off. And that's either usually water or solvents. So again, the 4 components of traffic paint: you have pigment, binder, filler, and the application vehicle. That's the 4 primary components. All right, let's talk about some technical specification terms. When you're looking at a paint, you're looking at a spec sheet on a paint. For instance, if you're looking at the TTP 1952E, Federal Spec Type 1, 2, so on and so forth, when you're looking at these are usually these technical specifications that you're going to see. One is going to be the WPG, which is the weight per gallon. Basically, the more weight, the more solids. And solids, you'll see in a moment what that is and why that's important. Understand that if water is 8.3 pounds per gallon, and that's the vehicle, if the paint weighs 14 pounds per gallon, then you can imagine you've got a tremendous amount of solids in there. So the more weight that paint, a lot of times in our paints, we'll oftentimes just, ours is a very high solid paint. So we'll ask somebody, all we'll do is we'll just say, pick up the pail. And when they pick up the pail, usually you can tell the difference right off. Our paint is running about 76% solids. So it's quite different than another paint that might run at 58% solids. So also, this is more application vehicle. It will be, of course, less weight. We'll go to next is viscosity. Viscosity, also referred to as thickness. One thing to know that just because the paint's thick doesn't mean it has more solids. That's actually usually achieved with fillers or with special chemicals. So don't let a thick paint fool you. We can make water thick if we want to with certain chemicals. So thickness does not always equal the solids. What thickness is important to you is because you want to make sure that it'll go through your machine and that it'll spray properly. If it's too thin, you're going to have a problem with it flowing on you when it hits the pavement. If it's too thick, you could have a problem with getting it through your machine. So that's viscosity. Total solids percentage. Now we're back kind of into that solids area. Solids is what's left on the pavement once it dries. Once the material dries, what's left there? And that is when the application vehicle fully evaporates. High solids, longer lasting paint and better coverage. Now those solids, of course, that are the products or the materials that components that make up the solids need to be of quality products. They have to be something that's going to last itself. But by nature, the more solids there are, the longer lasting that paint is going to be, and of course the better coverage. Next is dry time. This is the time it takes to dry to no tracking. This is kind of a film over dry time. So when you see dry time, unless it uses the word dry through, if it says dry time, that generally means dry time to no tracking. And they have a little test that they do with a metal cylinder, and they roll it. It's got these rubber rings around it, and they roll it down the ramp on this paint. And if it doesn't pick up on these rubber rings, then that's the no tracking time. And I believe you'll see some specs in a minute of when some of the paints that we're going to be talking about should be drying to no tracking. Pigment percentage, the amount of coloring component, quality and quantity controls the tint, the brightness, the fade resistance, and the opacity. Basically, the pigment is again what colors, what controls the color, the brightness, how bright it is to you, and also how much of that asphalt or that pavement can you see through it, or a line that may be under it. The less pigment, the more see-through it will become. The more pigment, the more pigment. Let's see how we can say that. Okay, the more pigment, the less you will see through it. The less pigment, the more you will see through it. Try that one out. Opacity. Opacity is just what we were just talking about on the pigment. Pigment affects the opacity. How much of the surface does not show through once drying? So they'll have, for instance, opacity on our paint, I think, is around 98–99%, which means that only 1 to 2% of the surface underneath will show through. And how they test that actually is they take a mill bar and they put the wet paint on there and they put it on this black piece of paper, and then you look at this black piece of paper and you decide how much of that black is showing through that paint. That's how they do opacity tests. Primarily controlled by the solids in the pigment, and high opacity means fewer coats needed. You don't have to put more coats on if you've got a high opacity paint. So weight per gallon, viscosity, total solids, dry time, pigment percentage, and opacity percentage. These are the 6 specifications that you'll see on almost every good specification sheet of paint, data sheet, and so forth. All right, let's talk about most of our discussion today is going to be on waterborne paints. But before we get started on that, I'd like to talk about the advantages of waterborne and the disadvantages of waterborne when compared to oil-based paints. By the way, there of course are other paints like chlorinated rubber paints and so forth, and I'll be glad to answer some questions on that as far as how the paints compare. But oil-based is the primary opponent to waterborne. Advantages of waterborne. It's more environmentally friendly. It is in both the manufacturing, the application, and disposal, because remember, those are the three things that you're dealing with. You're not just dealing with, you know, as somebody going to bend over and lift the stripe, and, you know, after application, but you also have the fact that it has to be safe to manufacture, and then it has to be safe to dispose of when either it's ground up or when you've got a pail that's almost empty but not quite empty. You need to be able to dispose of it. It's low volatile organic compounds. Volatile organic compounds, that's what comes off of a paint or a product in the evaporation process, and so it's important that these volatile organic compounds do not escape into our environment and continue to cause the problems that we have had experienced in the past and continue to experience. So it's better for the environment that reason. And also, again, it's lead-free, and this is important in the manufacturing process and the disposal, along with the application and the applicator. The next advantage would be it's easier to handle. It's decreased safety hazards, obviously, because it is friendlier environmentally. It is easier to clean the equipment. Warm, soapy water works well. And minimal transportation restrictions. In some states, you currently have a limitation on how much oil base you can carry at a time. Most manufacturers are now putting oil-based paints in the United States. They're putting them in 5-gallon pails instead of 55-gallon drums because of that reason. So there are restrictions on oil-based paints, and there's less on waterbornes. Better overall performance. There's faster no-track dry time, and not as affected by the humidity, and it's more durable. It used to be years ago, it used to be that waterbornes were far more durable than oil-borne paints were far more durable than waterbornes. And these days that's not the case at all. As a matter of fact, most waterbornes are about 30% more durable than your oil-borne paints. All right, what are some disadvantages though? Well, there's a little bit more equipment wear because you have to understand that waterborne paints actually have a larger grind. They're kind of a grainier paint, and so therefore can cause more wear. They're a little harder to push, so you're going to have to run them at higher pressures than you would for an oil-borne paint. Then you have the tip size will have to be larger, and it'll wear out your tips a little bit faster than an oil-based paint will be. Again, the tip size larger because of the size of the grind is what we call that. Appearance, flatter appearance. It does have a flatter appearance rather than a glossy appearance. It also has higher trackability. If you like that word there, that hyphenated word, that basically what that means is it holds the dirt in and debris a little bit more. It's primarily because of that big grind and that it's more porous. So it'll hold that dirt a little bit easier and debris than an oil-based paint will. Reactions. It does have it can have an inferior bond strength to HCC, which is concrete. We've actually come up with a solution for that. We'll share with that in a moment, and actually us and the resin manufacturers. Known to crack asphalt at high temperatures. If you have brand new asphalt and you apply that paint on a hot asphalt, it definitely certainly can crack. It'll be cracks that run along the line, along the side of lines, and I'm sure if you're a striper, you've seen this many times. Reacts to non-stainless steel metals. Basically, you have to be very careful with the type of steel that's on your machine. Back when we started changing over to these paints, a lot of people had steel or iron parts in their system. They had to replace all those because the paint would react. A lot of times that reaction is a gelling type thing that happens. So again, it's environmentally friendlier, easier to handle, and better overall performance. You're going to have a little bit more equipment wear. The appearance is going to be a little bit flatter, can get a little dirtier, and you have to watch out for its reactions to non-stainless steel metals within your paint equipment. All right, so now we'll go to waterborne binder types. Now, as I show you this, understand these are Dow examples. In in some previous webinars, I did get kind of tackled by their competitor and said, hey, don't forget about us. We supply products as well that are equal to this, and undoubtedly they do, and I'll mention them as well. But Dow, these are Dow examples because Dow kind of, you can look at these steps and these formulas and these binders and see how things have progressed. And so Dow is what we use. So that's also another reason to have them up here. But let's start with Fast Track 2706. Back in 1990, they created this waterborne resin, and it is a great thing about the 2706. It was a reliable maintenance paint. It was what we call first generation. You may hear me mention first generation, second generation, and so forth. But it was the first generation fast drying waterborne paint. It's 100% acrylic. It's fast dry. It's got a good cost and performance balance. It's economical, and it has good performance. Application rate, you put that down at about 15 mils wet. And of course, depending on your solids is what you'll end up with dry. And it has a harder finish, but as things get harder, they become a little less flexible. So this actually kind of causes a little problem, especially when you're dealing with things. They came up in 1995 with Fast Track 3427. Now this is a second generation paint, and it's 100% acrylic, just like the first 2706. It is a fast dry paint. It's got good cost and performance balance. It's applied at 15 mils, but it creates a softer finish. And of course, everything I'm doing here is really layman. If you're an engineer out there that, well, not an engineer, if you're a chemist out there and you want to debate on my terminology, please do so. But to bring it down to a simple format, basically the finish is a little bit softer, but that softness also makes it more flexible, and it also has better surface and bead adhesion. 3427 works very well on concretes, more so than 2706, and I'll tell you a little story about that in a moment, my experience with that at least. In 1999, they came out with Fast Track, which is a HD21A. Now this is Dow again. The other company is I believe Arkema, and they have a DT211, 250, 400, so they do have products that are similar to these. Again, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that so I don't get in trouble again. This paint is designed for to be high build durable paint. It's also called high build. A lot of people have started marketing it as liquid thermo. Please do not get confused by that. It is not thermo. That's one of those things that just drive me absolutely crazy as a guy that's in the know. It is not thermoplastic. Liquid thermo is generally just a high build paint. So it's got 100% cross-linking acrylic for durability. The other was 100% acrylic. This is 100% acrylic, but it has this cross-linking capability. And the reason it does is because this paint is designed to put on thicker. Basically, you take a 3427, 2706, and you put it down at 25 mils wet thickness, which is what this is prescribed for. You're not going to have good cohesion, and that's what this does. This helps that paint to be more cohesive. So it does have a longer dry time. Obviously, as you'll see, 25 wet mils. It's going to have a longer dry time than something that's put down at 15 mils. It does have double the surface life. It does have double the surface life, 2 years plus. Great, a great paint for that. Understand that you're using twice as much paint as well. It is more durable. It does have the flexibility, and it does have the surface and bead adhesion that similar to or is equal to the 3427. Lastly, in 2006, they came up with the Fast Track XSR. This is a low-temperature resin binder. Low temperature conditions, that's 35 degrees and rising. Understanding that 2706, 3427, and especially HD21, you want to be at 50, 55 and rising. And you have to remember that's surface temperature and air temperature, very important. So in this particular binder, you can actually apply it at 35 degrees and rising. 100% fast release acrylic. Fast, good dry time. You're going to definitely have some fast to good dry time, and what that means is that if you're at 35, you're going to have a good dry time. If you're at 75, you're going to have fast dry time. Lasting performance certainly has lasting performance, and its application rate is 12 to 15 mils wet, and you have good flexibility over a variety of surfaces. So again, these four is the 1990 was the first generation, 2706. Second generation was 3427. Then we came in with the HD21, so we could get high build and longer lasting paint because we could put more of it down. The durability of a marking is directly related not only to the components it's made of, but to the thickness it's applied. So that's why, of course, again, you put it down twice as thick, you're going to get twice the life out of it. And then, of course, the Fast Track to XSR for those northern states that want to do some work as you get into those borderline seasons. All right, here's a nice little slide I've seen. You'll see that's the alkyd oil base on the left. Then you go into Fast Track 2706. You can see how much more durable that is. And then your Fast Track 3427, which is even further more durable than the 2706. All right, let's talk about the waterborne paints that we've developed in design. We have two primary waterborne paints. One is ProStripe Plus, and ProStripe Plus has been around for a number of years. I would have to say 14 years. I should know that. The ProStripe MX is not a new paint, but it's I think we developed that in about 2008, 2009 range, and I'll tell you the story of why. The features on the paints, they're both waterborne traffic paints. They both meet the federal specs of TTP 1952E Type 1 and 2, and we're going to talk about those specs in a moment. They're both lead-free. They both have low VOCs. They both have high solids, and they both are fast dry. They both have high pigment content, and they both are airless striper formulation. When I developed the ProStripe Plus paint, the reason I went out and developed it instead of selling someone else's paint was because I was selling someone else's paint, is that traffic paint is usually made in very, very large batches. And because of that large batch process, there's a lot of variance. There's variance in its viscosity, variance in its, all the way down to its pale fills. We were having major variances in. And the problem is that if you have a paint, a traffic paint going through a standard traffic striping machine, which we're talking about a long line truck with a massive piston on it and so forth, it doesn't matter how thick or thin that paint is, those pumps can pump cold concrete. But with our machines, our walk-behind airless machines, and that's what this was designed for, it's a different game. It's a different game not only because you have a smaller pump pushing the paint, but you also have somebody that instead of going 7 miles an hour down the road, not looking back, but to see that there's still yellow on the road, you actually have a guy that's standing over at about 3.5 feet off that line, and they're seeing every little movement of that line. So we needed consistency, and we needed a paint that was really designed for the airless stripers, and that's why we went out and did that. Both the MX and the ProStripe Plus was designed for that. Can they be used in a conventional air machine, which we'll talk about in a little bit? Absolutely. But there are some precautions you take because it is a fast dry paint. Innovative hybrid resin formulation. Okay, so the quick story on ProStripe MX. Back in 2008, we expanded into the Texas market. I actually put in a location there in Houston. And what we ran to was, of course, ProStripe Plus is well known. We sell a tremendous amount of this material. It's just loved by our contractors. It's just one of those products you love to sell because you never get any complaints. So we used ProStripe. We of course took our ProStripe Plus with us, and when we did, we found out that Texas has a lot of concrete, and Florida, which is where our original market was, is all asphalt. So when they started using our ProStripe Plus on the concrete in Texas, we started having problems. Why? Why? Because what formula, or I'm sorry, what binder is not so, it does not bond as well on concrete. That's the 2706. That's what ProStrike Plus is. It's 2706. It has all these other things in it, but the base binder is 2706. So we said, okay, well, that's not working, so let's go to the 3427 and try to solve this problem. We went to 3427, but then we had a problem, another problem. Remember I told you that 3427 is a little softer and it's porous. So what happened is that although it was bonding to the concrete well, it was allowing, it was softer, so it was allowing a lot of tracking. And you know, that concrete dust is a nightmare. I'm sure you've dealt with it out there. So we decided that wasn't solving our problem, because then we were getting complaints that, oh well, the paint gets dirty easy. So we went back to the drawing board and we actually created a hybrid resin formulation that actually includes both of those resins, both the first generation and the second generation, at a certain ratio. We had to tweak the ratio. And to give it even more of a kick of hardness, we actually added something called a hardened silica blend is what we added. We took out some of that calcium carbonate that I was talking about, and we put in this silica blend. And what it does is it helps protect from wear, the scuffing, the petroleum, and it's definitely, by nature, this particular silica that we're using also protects from UV damage. It definitely has superior cohesion and adhesion, advanced color control retention, mainly that's through the silica material that we use, and also the resin itself. Improved bead retention, that's what that paint was actually, part of what that paint was designed for, to help hold the beads better if you need retroreflectivity, and enhanced dry-through resin. So it's going to dry through much faster. Remember I said you have dry to no tracking, and then you have dry through. All right, so that's the two paints, ProStrike Plus and ProStrike MX, and there's the history of those. And I think we've got a special coming up on those for you at the end of the presentation. Okay, now we're going to get into specifications. I have listed before you 3 specs: TTP 1952B, TTP 1952D and E Type 2, and TTP 1952E Type 3. All right, these are the standard waterborne specifications set by the government. So I want to go over these so that you know, when you go out and you buy a paint, this is really one of the first questions. This is the first question I ask. If I'm talking to somebody about paint, I'll say, okay, what spec are you going? Oh, it's federal spec. What federal spec are you talking about? Because there's a big difference between a 1952B and a 1952E Type 3, as you'll see. All right, so first we have the organic, volatile organic compounds. On all 3 paints, it is low. You have low volatile organic compounds. You have a coverage rate of about 350 on the B, 350 to 390 on the D. It's usually higher in solids, and that's why. And then you have about half that in the Type 3, the high build paint, obviously, because you're doing a double application. Viscosity, 75 to 80. On the Type 2 is 80 to 90, so you're going to have a thicker paint. So you're going to have more pressure to push that paint, and 85 to 95 on the high build. Weight per gallon, 12 pounds on a 1952B. Why? Because it has lesser solids. 13.5 on a DE Type 2, and then 13 pounds on the Type 3. Dry time to no tracking. B. Now they will make a 1952B paint, and they'll alter it to make it a fast dry paint as well. But that's only that's under certain conditions. So just because you have a fast dry paint doesn't mean it's a D or E Type 2. Okay, so understand that. So they'll take a B and they'll make it a fast dry. But as the spec goes, you have a 15 to 60 minute dry time at 15 mils wet. A to no tracking, dry to no tracking. Now when you get to Type 2 of D and E, basically D and E is the same spec except E added to Type 3. D was Type 1 and 2, and then they needed to add a Type 3, so they went ahead and created the 1952E. Now they got 1, 2, and 3. 1 to 3 minutes. Yes, 1 to 3 minutes this paint will dry. By the time you finish one stall line, the next stall line will be, or the one before that, By the time you finish one, the one before that is probably dry, depending on your conditions, your weather conditions, which you can learn in our weather seminar. We have 25 to 30 wet mils thickness, so it's going to take 3 to 10 minutes. You can accelerate that dry time. There is some product out there that you can drop in with the beads that will accelerate that dry, and we can talk about that offline if you'd like to know more about it. We do not sell that product at this time, but we can certainly guide you to the right people. Binder type, 100% acrylic. We talked about this on that. The biggest difference is that the Type 3 does have the cross-linking. Common binders, of course, 2706 is the most common for the B. 2706 or 3427 can be used for the D. Our ProStripe Plus and ProStripe MX will meet the 1952 D or E Type 1 and 2. And then your HD21 binders for the Type 3 or the equivalent by Arkema. Let's see, the common bind, let's see, we've got total solids, 60%, 77%, and 75%. And they all have about a 1-year shelf life. Adversely affected by high humidity is what you'll run into with the B. Obviously, it's a slower dry, and you can have that. And then we talked about the steel equipment on the others. The top things here is that you get the best coverage with the 2. Your highest viscosity doesn't always mean it's the best, because we actually have to kick down our viscosity from time to time because it can be a pain in the rear to run through our machines otherwise. And weight 13.5. No tracking, 1 to 3 minutes. You just can't beat that. The cross-linking is a better formula. Anytime you have some paint that's cross-linking, that's good. 77% solids is the highest solids on there, and that is it. So let's move on now to, and I'm starting to speed up a little bit, as you'll notice. If you could please answer this poll. What federal spec paint are you currently using the most of? And it's 1952B, D and E Type 2, E Type 3, that's the high build, or gosh, I don't know. It's a bucket of some paint that we buy. So if you'd answer that question, I'd greatly appreciate it. And I'll give you a minute to do that.
We got about 48% of you have gotten your vote in. I'll give you just another moment.
Thank you, Lynn. I cut you off on the last one.
Yeah, a little bit. All right, I think we're going to get everyone we're going to get here. We have 36% at the Type 2, no one on the B or the Type 3. And 64% say they don't know.
Yeah, and you know, that's a common thing. So guys that don't know, don't worry about it, but learn about it. That's why you're here, is so that you'll know the difference between what you're using. I ask this question all the time from my contractors, and they say, oh, I got this paint and it's a lot cheaper or whatever. I'll say, okay, well, first let's start out with what spec is it. And what that's important is because that's going to create a minimum level of specification. And although it may not be the best level, it's a minimum level that you know that it at least does this. So it's not uncommon to not know. Ask your supplier. All right. Thank you, Lynn. All right, we'll move on. Okay, this is a good one. This is a great chart. As a matter of fact, there's several charts in here that at the end, I believe you'll have a way of getting some of these charts. But this is an awesome one. I like it a lot. This shows you how well waterborne paint works with other products. Basically, waterborne will be compatible with waterborne, solvent paint, epoxies, MMAs, and thermoplastic. Great waterborne paints can be put basically on anything. Question, I get the question a lot. Can I restripe with your paint over the old paint? And I said, well, here's the biggest problem is that product clean that you're putting it down on, and is it well bonded to the surface? Because if it's not, I'm only going to stick to whatever you put me on. So if you put me on dirt, I'm going to stick really good to that dirt. But as soon as that dirt cuts loose, so will the paint. I'll stick well to the paint that's on the ground already, but if that paint is loose and will come up, well, my paint's going to come up with it because I'm going to stay with you. So just be cautious of that. That's the only time that you have to really be worried about waterborne paints, is if they're going to adhere, is what you're putting it on clean clean, dry. We can go through all that, but is it clean? And is it adhered well to the surface? Solvent paints, you're going to stick to everything but waterbornes. Solvent paints do not like to work with waterborne. Solvent paints don't like working with waterborne paints. Epoxy sticks to epoxy. MMAs, MMA sticks to MMA. Thermoplastic, now thermoplastic's pretty versatile as well. It can stick to waterborne paints. That's why a lot of striping is done in paint first, and then you come through with thermoplastic. Temporary striping should be done in waterborne or solvent paints. You never would want to use epoxy or MMAs for temp striping. And of course, thermoplastic does stick to thermoplastic, and thermoplastic does stick to preformed thermoplastic as well. So there should not be any bonding issues, again, as long as those things are taken care of. It's clean and it's adhered well to the surface. All right, let's get to application. That was just materials, but we're going to buzz through the application side. I see we're well into it. Now, this is not how you apply paint. There's a nice little joke that normally I tell when I have more time, but I'll have to tell you on the next one. All right, so traffic paint equipment. There are two primary methods of application, and one is through a conventional air spray machine. Most of you have seen these. Kelly Creswell was a big name. MB was a big name back in the days. Looney Liner, this is Jim Creswell Looney. I think it was his grandfather that was part of the Kelly Creswell group. Anyway, great machines, durable as all get out, and I'll talk about that. Air pressurized sealed tank, the pressure forces the paint out of the tank. The pressure in the tank forces the paint out. Additional air is at the gun at the end of the line, and it atomizes, or it sprays or spreads that paint, breaks the paint up for a smoother application. The great thing about these machines is they're durable and they're low cost in maintenance. I mean, I've had guys tell me, I had a story real quick of a guy that was moving his paint machine from one point to another point. It was a municipality, sorry, guys out there, but it was a municipality, and they decided they wanted to. The guy got on the hood of the pickup truck and put the paint machine in front of the pickup truck, and he was holding on to it, and the driver got too fast, and the thing got squirrely, and it actually flipped the paint machine, damaged it, bent it up, and everything else. They took it back to the shop, bent the things back in place, and shoot, they're probably still using the machine. So they are extremely durable. However, there are airless machines, and airless machines now are the most widely used striping machines probably in the world, but definitely in the United States. Basically, how this works is the pump draws the paint from the tank. Remember, there's no pressure in the tank now, so it draws the material, and then the paint is forced into a universal gun, into this one gun, and this gun, why it's called universal, it can be used for hand spraying, it can be used as a down gun. On an air machine, you actually usually have a handgun and a down gun. Then the paint exits through what they call a rack tip. Rack means reverse a clean. Reverse a clean. That's where rack comes from. A rack type tip, and at a high pressure, and it's going to spray much sharper lines, and it's much easier to operate. It may not have the durability, and I will mention also the air machines. You can go to your local hardware and get 90% of what's on that machine. Of course, now airless machines are so popular. A lot of your Home Depots and Lowe's and so forth also have airless parts now. But it used to be that you could only get those parts from the manufacturer. But it's so easy to operate, and if you guys already operate them, you know what I'm talking about. You can put a guy behind a striper pretty darn quick. If they know how to operate a mower, they can operate the basics of stripe. Doesn't mean they're a big good striper, but they can operate the machine very quickly. And if you have high turnover, by gosh, get yourself an airless striper, that's for sure. All right, so we're going to do a real quick poll here. What kind of traffic paint equipment does your organization use and for pavement marking needs? Conventional air machine, an airless machine, or you're not doing paint application. Conventional air, airless, or you're not doing paint application.
And as we're waiting for the votes to come out of this, we are running a little short on time today. We're going to keep on going until we're done with the presentation. If you need to jump off, we totally understand. The presentation is being recorded. You will receive the link as soon as it's available afterwards, later tonight or first thing in the morning. So you can go ahead and watch the rest of the presentation then. If you do drop off, make sure to ask your questions before you do that. Let's see, we have about 63% of the votes are in, so we'll go ahead and show this. We have 13% are using the conventional air machine, 73% of you are using the airless systems, and another 13% aren't currently doing paint application.
Well, there you go. That's exhibit. Hey, I told you so. Airless machines, definitely the most widely used. Smartest machine for most agencies and so forth to use, only for the fact that it's easier to use. However, if you know how to use a conventional machine, man, those things are great. They're great for durability. And so we'll move on. Thank you very much for participating in the poll. And I do apologize for running over. I'm a stickler for starting and finishing on time, and I apologize for this. Surface preparation. All right, so of course we talked about the equipment that you can use. It's either airless or air machines. Now we're going to get into surface preparation. What do you do? Well, first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that the surface is free and dry. Dry and free of dirt, debris. Most people use a blower for this case. If you get into a situation where you have mud or dirt, heavy dirt, you're going to probably use, you can use a pressure washer, a power broom. There's many different ways that you can clean that, but most striping is usually prepared, or the surface is prepared by simply blowing. If you have poorly adhered existing markings, you must remove them. If you have curing compound on the surface, that's usually, of course, on HCC, concrete applications, you should be removing that. This shows, by the way, the other one was a billy goat blower. I think that looks like about a 13 horsepower. Billy goats are great blowers. Then this is a Smith rotary grounder LNX8. These things are awesome. They will cut up the material, but not your surface. They have this nice feathering type cut. They're not drum cutters like what you'd normally see. I highly recommend those. And then you want to make sure that there's no moisture present. So to verify that, basically you take a piece of visqueen or clear plastic, and you'll tape it to the surface. And it's got to be in a sunny spot. You want to wait about 20 minutes or so. Then when you pull it up, if you notice, and I'll show you here, if there's dots, if you have water, you're going to have some moisture build up almost no matter what you do. But what you're looking for are water droplets that are about the size of the end of an eraser, a pencil eraser. If they're that size, then you better hold off because you're probably going to have some bonding issues. That's a sweat test. There's a couple other ways you can use roofing tar paper, do the same thing, flip it over and look. And of course, there's the moisture gauges out there as well. Those run about $100 and something. I honestly haven't looked into those very deeply, but I know they use them on concrete a lot. But this is a real quick, simple test to make sure that you don't have too much moisture down, especially if it's just rained anytime recently. That can be a problem. All right, the other thing is that you want to make sure that the temperatures are 50 degrees and rising, 50 degrees and rising, and rising and rising and rising. You don't want to be putting it down at 50 degrees in the late afternoon because it's only going to get colder. So you want to make sure that it's getting warmer, not getting colder. And that needs to be ambient and surface temperatures. Remember, in the morning, you're probably going to have cooler surface, warmer ambient. In the evening, you're probably going to have warmer surface and cooler warmer surface and cooler ambient. That's in our weather seminar. I would love to tell you more about that. Caution with temperatures above 90 degrees. If you have 90-degree ambient temperatures, you probably have about 30% hot. If that pavement is black or dark in color, you'll have at least a 30% increase in surface temperature. So that surface temperature will be, anywhere between 120 to 140 degrees. So be careful. You could have some asphalt cracking if you put the paint down at that temperature, especially if it's new asphalt. Paint application. We got 15. You're going to apply it at 15 to 25 mils, and the reason there's such a big span there, you want to be at about 15 mils for your standard paints and 25 mils for your high build paints. Second application may be necessary on porous surfaces. Keep that in mind, especially if you're speccing out a job or looking at a job or trying to figure out how much paint is going to be needed on that surface. Look at the surface. It all depends. How much paint are you going to use? It all depends. Drop on glass beads. If you're using glass beads for retroreflectivity, you need to drop them immediately behind the gun. Remember, these paints are drying in 1 to 3 minutes, especially the 1952E type 1s and 2s. They're drying in a very quick time, so that gun's got to be right behind you. You want to make sure those beads are 55 to 60% embedment so you get proper reflectivity. We'll show you a little bit of that in a moment. Protect the line until it's dry to no tracking. Caution. Parking lots with new asphalt and elevated temperatures, too thin applications are recommended. No glass beads are recommended for a number of reasons. I mean, you can, but one is you've got the whole slip fall issues that are going on right now out there. So I don't really recommend the glass beads you put on. And also the other reason is because a thin application won't hold the beads anyway. So you have 2 thin applications are going to be much better than 1 thick application when you have new asphalt and elevated temperatures. All right, let's talk about tip wear. This is really important. This is something that a lot of people don't know. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to move from left to right. So left, this is the tip when it was new. This is all the same tip, but watch what it does as it wears. So it's a new 517 tip. So a 517 will give you a 10 to 12 inch line, width of a line. And watch what happens. And now you notice it does 0.30 gallons per minute. That's pretty typical. Now, if you go to the right, you see now it's worn to a 419. It's the same tip. It's just worn differently. Now you're going to get an 8-inch wide line. Now, your line gets narrower, but look down at your flow rate. Your flow rate starts to go up. Then you go into, as you wear it, it gets worn down to a 321. As a 321, you see how it's becoming this optical? It goes from kind of rectangular to oval to optical to round. And that's when you're using a ton of paint. So you go from 6-inch, then you go down to 4-inch, you're wearing it to a 323. Notice the orifice, which is those last 2 digits, 17, 19, 21, 23. So when a tip goes from 17 to wear to the size of a 23, you're using 90% more paint. 90. Now, I love selling you paint, but listen, it's worth it to go ahead and change out that tip. And different manufacturers recommend different times of changing out, how long that tip will last. So change your tips. And the best way to do it, you want to know when to change it? Just take a piece of paper, take a piece of cardboard, and just tap your trigger on the cardboard, and look for these patterns. And if these patterns work toward your 6-inch here, that's 321, it's time to start getting rid of that tip. And it's certainly time to get rid of it when you're at 90% flow increase. All right, so this is another chart that you can receive. All right, troubleshooting paint. Proper paint's going to be, it's got the right size, the right pressure. It's going to be nice and smooth all the way across. If you have start and finish bulge or splatter, that's usually caused because you have a cable that's too loose, or you could have a worn tip. This goes back to that circular pattern can occur. The bulge in the beginning, a lot of times that has to do with you're starting from a stopped position. You're pulling the trigger at a stopped position. Highly recommend that you learn to, when you're pushing that machine, that you hit the line as you're rolling. You're rolling before you hit the trigger. If you're not really good at that yet, you can use shingles, tar shingles or something like that, roofing shingles. That's a great thing to use, and you can kind of partially spray over that and then have a nice crystal line at the beginning. So usually this has to do either with a worn tip or a loose gun cable. If you have this is a very common one that we see, especially we call it pattern surging. Let's see, and this is probably similar to the hourglassing. This is from a worn tip. This can be from a worn tip, but mostly it's from what I found is that it's either the pressure or the power's too low on the machine. When you're dealing with waterborne paints, they're very heavy, so you go to a high pressure, the highest pressure you can go to, and then work your way down. It can be a clogged tip. It can be a filter that's clogged, a suction leak. and a spray hose that's too small. We've seen that recently as well when smaller spray hoses are used on these smaller airless machines. You have a tip is severely clogged, the filter's clogged, and the air system malfunction if you have a spitting gun. This is probably the most thing I'd pull out of this is that the filter can be clogged and cause this and not your tip, which is kind of odd. We discovered this several years ago. We were getting this. We couldn't figure out why because the tip was clean, but it was actually being caused by the filter inside. Clean that filter, that inline filter. Both machines have them, both Gracos and Titans. And I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the airless goes and so forth, but I'm sure all airless machines have inline filters. Then we go to thin edge and thick in the middle. It means that the tip is worn. Back to remember that that tip that gets worn out and it's spraying more of a circular pattern than a rectangular. Or the paint is too heavy and it's not being able to be broken up by the pressure that your machine's allowing. Partially, this is a thin center, thick edge. That is, pressure power is too low. You could have a number of issues that are causing that. You've got edged lines that are grooved. You'll see this from time to time. And that means the tip, usually the tip is partially clogged, kind of like your thin line. You can have a little piece in there that's causing that. Debris in the paint. Pressure could be low or high. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Again, that's why I say always go to the highest pressure and work your way down. Coarse edges. Pressure's too low. Or a worn tip. Paint can be too heavy for the pressure that you've applied. A gun is too close to the surface. If your gun's too close to the surface, like you have a wide tip on there and you try to make it a narrow line, you're going to have a really thick line and it's going to probably splatter on you. Pressure too high. This is sprayed edges. This is overspray. This is what I was talking about, backing down. You go all the way up and you start backing it down. Otherwise, you could have this overspray and it can be pretty nasty. Also, the gun can be too far from the surface, and that can be a problem, or it's windy, of course. Too narrow. You have a tip worn. The tip is too small. The gun is angled, not perpendicular. This can be a real problem. A lot of times you got to look at that gun and make sure it's lined up perpendicular to the line you're trying to strike, because it can be tilted a little bit, and it can actually cause that line to be, instead of 6 inches, it'll be 5 inches, 4 inches. So that's definitely something you want to make sure as soon as you get ready to strike. This is if the line's too wide, you can have the paint can be too light or too thin. This is really common. If on fast dry waterborne paint, sometimes people want to slow them down a little bit. We don't recommend more than about 10 ounces of water in a 5-gallon pail. So they are not designed to cut. I'll say, oh, I buy this paint because it's so heavy and so thick. I can cut it one. Oh my gosh, it drives us crazy as manufacturers. So you want to be sure to have to make sure that you don't put too much water in that paint. I prefer not to put any water in the paint, but for sometimes there are reasons that you need. But no more than about a Coke can of water in the paint. And you'll see a huge difference between, even in that small 10 ounces of water, or 10, 12 ounces, is that line will stretch because it's using the same amount of pressure, the same tip. You're going to get a larger line. Next is the application. This is too thick. Basically, your man's walking too slow. He needs to pick up his pace, or his tip is too big, and you're just the orifice is too large. Pressure power could be too high, not as likely, and the paint would be heavy or thick. Line's too thin. Now the guy's walking too fast. You know, this is first thing in the morning. He's ready to rock and roll, or after his monster drink. So he's walking too fast. He's going to have to slow that pace down. If that line, if you start seeing opacity that you didn't, or having a lesser opacity than you had before, don't blame the paint first. Look at his pace. Or the tip could be too small. Okay, so this is a chart that we're going to allow you to have from attending this webinar. We'll send you the details on that, and it'll show everything we just went over. And in the red, of course, are the most common. This is actually a thermal applications troubleshooting chart. We'll send you that as well if you'd like. And this is in our Pavement Marking 102 course. And this is a glass bead chart to show you some problem shooting and proper application of glass beads. Remember I told you 50 to 60%, 55 to 60% beads need to be embedded. This is really important, and this chart is great. It's provided, I don't even want to say who it's provided by. I don't quite remember it. I don't want to say the wrong name. But you can see if it's 10%, if it's embedded at about 10%, you get no reflectivity at all. 90% you get minimum reflectivity because only a small part of the bead is shown. You're better to have the beads too deep than too shallow, because as the paint wears, at least more, it'll be actually more reflective over time. But that 55 to 60% is certainly the optimum depth of the glass bead for retroreflectivity. All right, inspection. Government agencies, let's see how many of you are out there. What is the current mix of your in-house versus contract paint application? I do 100% of our own striping. We do 75% in-house, 25% contract, about 50-50, 25%, 75%, 100% contracted. If I could get you guys to entertain us there with that poll, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, we got about 40% in. We're expecting about 50. All right. So we have 36% do all in-house application, 27% do 75% in-house, 25% out. 18% are doing about 25% in-house and 75% contracted out. And we have about 18% that are doing 100% contracted out.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lynn. That's really interesting information. It sounds like a lot of you guys are doing all of your striping in-house, so I'm hoping this is a great tool for you, this presentation. Also, those guys that are doing 100% contracted, this course is just as important, because what it does is it's going to help you identify your contractor's problems. Not that they're going to appreciate that, but at least at first. But it certainly is a great way. It helps you to inspect the materials and the application. Okay, let's talk about inspection. Paint inspection components. All right, first of all, is it the right color? Is it within the specified color box? Is the yellow yellow? Is the white white? Or is the yellow brown? Is the yellow green? Is the yellow gray? Is the white gray? So this is important. You can get these. This is actually a federal form. Believe it or not, I think I had to buy it for like $60 for a piece of paper with colors on it. But it's a great thing to use. You can also use a spectrophotometer, which is used in higher-end pavement markings like thermoplastic and so forth. So you want to make sure it's the right color. You want to make sure it's the right thickness, and it's within the specs of the thickness. Now remember, paint is checked. Its thickness is checked when it's wet. So you'll need a wet mill gauge, and we can supply those. You just contact us. We'd be glad to get you one. So is it the right thickness? Is it the right width? There's a difference between 5.5 inches and 6 inches. One thing to keep in mind, especially the government agencies out there, is that when I used to run in this quite a bit when I was a striper, if we're painting a temporary line for a 6-inch line, we're going to paint it 5.5 inches. I know you don't like it sometimes, but we're doing that so that we can cover it properly. So there's a little bit of tolerance when we're running over it with thermoplastic. So that's the only time that line would be less width than what was prescribed. Embedment of the beads, you want to check and make sure those beads are embedded. If you've got beads in it, get down on your hands and knees, take that magnifying glass and look, because this is really important. If those beads are sitting up on top of that paint because they put those beads on too late, those beads are going to roll off very quickly. You're going to lose all your reflectivity, or a substantial portion. You can check the reflectivity to make sure that it is within specs. This here is shown as a StripeMaster 2. They just came out with the StripeMaster 2 Touch, which is an awesome machine, easy to use, very cool. Anyway, that's the product that we use for checking all of our reflectivity, retroreflectivity. Also, you're going to check for adhesion and cohesion, especially if there's any suspicion. Cold weather, not looking right, that kind of thing. You can take a putty knife and you actually can place it under the edge of the line and just try to pull up a piece of that line. If that line comes up clean, you got a problem. If it comes up with asphalt, you likely don't have a problem because now you've got good adhesion happening. So again, you're going to look at the appearance, the thickness, the width, the bead embedment, the reflectivity if necessary, and its adhesion and cohesion. And we're in the home stretch, folks. Defects. All right. What is causing this defect? Several things can be. One is could just have high traffic volume. It's just wearing out the material. It could be that the application was applied too thin in the beginning, depending on how old this is. Or it could be just that the rough pavement surface is causing it. A lot of times what happens is when we paint a line on a rough pavement surface, it'll wear much quicker. It'll at least appear to wear much quicker because most of that paint that you're seeing is on the top rock. And of course, that's carrying a considerable amount of wear because the tire's not getting on the entire surface, just on that top rock. So a rough surface can definitely cause premature wear on paint. Look at this. We got delamination. Now what can cause this? Pavement may not be clean. In this case you see some water there, so let's say that there was a sprinkler system that had some iron, and you're in the south and you got some iron coming up out of in the water, and so it wasn't cleaned off, or this looks like concrete, so concrete dust wasn't cleaned up properly, so improperly cleaned. Ambient or surface temperature is too low. You'll see this a lot when paint is put down on surface temperatures or ambients that are too low, a lot of times especially on surface. People don't check the surface temperature, and they really should be with some type of, we use an infrared thermometer. Then we have pavement is too smooth. That can happen. If you don't have, remember, it's what kind of bond? A mechanical bond. So if it's a mechanical bond, it has to have some type of texture to grab a hold of. Is the best way. Initial material is applied too thick. If you get a line too thick, sometimes it'll be more cohesive than it is adhesive. So it'll stick to itself real well, but it doesn't bond very well to the pavement. It doesn't set properly in. Okay. Next one is defective bead loss. This is a nice picture here, and I believe the Florida DOT passed this on to us. This is where bead embedment was not deep enough. Excuse me. It could also be a binder issue, that the binder wasn't holding the beads well. Maybe they were using a bad binder. But basically, you've got bead loss. Material is applied too thin. If the material is applied too thin, the beads have nowhere to bond, and the bead application was too late. We talked about that. If you put on the beads, you got a guy spreading the beads. Spreading the beads behind a thermoplastic application unit by hand is not recommended, but is more acceptable than paint, because that paint's setting up a little faster in a lot of cases. It's not so forgiving. Dark yellow or discoloration of a line, excuse me, it could be a paint defect. It contains excessive iron oxide. We'll show another one here. This is a faded yellow, and this could be an application defect. If you look at the line, you can see the yellow is maintaining better on the overlap than it is on the single line. So it looks like it was a thin application, but you could also have a poor quality pigment, and I believe that that's one of the issues with this paint as well, is that in this picture, I would identify it as a pigment defect, or a pigment. A lot of the pigments are very expensive part of the paint. So if somebody's going to reduce cost, that's a place to reduce cost. And some of our imported pigments were really bad back a few years ago. In fact, we even had some of it get into our paints at one point, and we found out, and we got that corrected, and it will never happen again. So it could be a paint defect. White dullish finish. This is a white paint, believe it or not. This can either be that there's not enough titanium dioxide or low quality TiO2, which is absolutely possible. It's the same thing as we talked about pigments. You can get a cheap TiO2 or you can get a quality TiO2, and that can make a difference, or not enough. Again, TiO2 is pretty much the most expensive part of your paint, and that's what's causing, again, as I said, prices to rise so much. So TiO2, very important. but that's what you can get if you have a dull finish if that's not quite right. All right, we go to the paint appears to be transparent. This could be an application defect. Basically, material wasn't applied thick enough. You can see actually in this particular image, you can see some areas that there is a nice yellow and then there's no yellow, and you can see those are like stopping points, starting points, that type of overlap points. So there's a good chance that one of the problems was that this was applied too thin. You could just have a paint though that is not of best quality, and it's got a lower opacity and lower pigment. Excuse me, I'm getting a cough here. Defect. Here, it's dirty. If the paint gets dirty, this happens a lot. I get a call and they say, "Oh, the paint's all dirty," and so I have to go out or I say, "Send me some pictures. Let me take a look at it." Usually, this is caused by dust or debris on the material post-application. Now, this can happen because the material wasn't completely dry when somebody drove on it. It could be just that, again, on concrete surfaces, that concrete dust can be a problem. So this can happen. And also, poor surface preparation can cause this as well. All right, so we're at the pop quiz part here. This is Name That Defect. You ready? Okay. The first application, what do you think is the cause of this defect? Okay, improper preparation of the surface. All right, let's try the next one. Oh, same thing. Improper preparation of the surface. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay. Now, this is the best of all of them. Yes, improper preparation. This is improper layout. See if you can find that. It took me a minute. I'm like, what's wrong with this? And I realized that somebody made a mistake. It's like I think they started on opposite ends and ended up against each other there. So yeah, improper layout in this case. This is improper weather forecasting, especially for the. You can use, actually, we have the DAF scale. I'll tell you about that in a moment, where you can predict this from happening, or predict that this is going to happen, so you can not let it happen. bad situation there. Yeah, this is working with what you got. Very interesting. I guess they decided instead of going over top of it, they'd go around it, not realizing that it's better to have a blank piece in your line than it is to have a curve in your line. Well, that's a good one there. I'd say the defect is the driver for sure. Maybe they were trying to avoid somebody or something. This is tape application, as you can see here. Gosh, how do you get that? Okay, this is a good one. This would be confusing to the driver, I'm sure. All right, we're going to go over some tips and tricks. Tips and tricks. These are submitted by the attendees, and these are really good. So please hang out for these. Always clean out the equipment at the end of the shift. It'll help prevent problems the next time you are ready to paint. Yes. Keep that equipment clean. At the end of the shift is the best time. It doesn't take that long with airless machines to clean them out. Run a couple of pails of water through them. Make sure you drain the paint first, and then run your water through. Don't run your water through immediately. Try to get all the paint out of the system. Just be careful not to dry. If you run that pump dry for too long, that can be bad for the pump as well. But very good idea. Turn your paint striper gun back to the outside of your back wheel for easier striping of curved lines. A lot of people don't know this. When you try to do a curved line, if it's a real tight curve, your back tire will actually drive over top that line. So the best way to prevent that is to actually switch your gun around. This is, of course, an airless machine. Spin your gun around and put it down by your back tire, and you can do as tight of a radius as you possibly can make the machine do without tracking over top of it. Make sure the machine is moving when you pull the trigger to avoid paint puddles. And this is what I was talking about earlier, actually, was you need to have that machine moving forward when you hit that trigger, otherwise you'll get a puddle in the beginning. If you are having problems with aiming and getting that to start at the same time, definitely use some kind of shingles or roofing shingles. That would work very good. Just line them up where you want to start or where you want to stop, and even where you want to stop if you want. Okay, turn airless tip to closed position during striping delays. This is important. This is a great one because it'll reduce your tip clogging. If you're going to go from one end to the parking lot to the other, then just go down, take your rack tip, again, airless machine, take your rack tip and twist it a quarter position, and that's going to seal that off, and it's going to keep you from clogging up your tip. Glass bead quality does make a difference. I don't know who got that one, but that's certainly true. Clarity of the glass bead will make a difference. The size of the glass bead will make a difference. The roundness of the glass bead does make a difference. Make sure you get a quality glass bead. For double lines, set the gun cable tension so that the outer gun activates at 50% trigger pull. Love this. This is really cool. If you got a double line, don't ever stripe a double line twice. Trying to maintain that 4 inches, 6 inches apart, that's really difficult. So if you've got some solid skip going on, you can set your gun up so that when you pull the trigger, one line comes on, and then you pull it all the way, both lines come on. So then you go to halfway, full, and it's going to get you your skip line on one side, a solid line on the other. Use roofing shingles. Oh, there you go. Start and stop your lines. You see where I get all my good ideas from, and make them more sharper. Have tar paper or cardboard handy for tip adjustments. Definitely, tar paper is great because it comes in a roll. Cardboard is, kind of bulky and so forth, but it really works well. Tar paper lays flat usually, so definitely, keep some of that on your truck so you can adjust your tip to what you need. Your tip's going to change. Your gun's going to move around as you load it and unload it. So it's the easiest, cleanest way to do it. Add a splash of water at the top of the paint while striping to keep the paint from scabbing. This is really a good idea because these fast dry paints will skim at the top because they're going to dry. They get exposed to air, and it's not an enclosed tank like you have with an air machine. This, of course, is an airless striper that we're talking about. You can put just a layer of paint across the top. Somebody has, from time to time, actually, one of the comments was mentioning putting a paint thinner at the top, and it'll keep the bucket clean. That's okay as long as that thinner will float right and not get in there mixed with the paint, because you don't want to mess with the chemical nature of the paint. Traffic paint dry time is speeded up with higher temperatures, lower humidity, and higher wind speed. Very important. This paint dries in a minute, and in 1 minute. Well, you get out there on December 22nd, and it's 55 degrees if you're lucky, 55 degrees with an 80% humidity. That paint, if you get 90% humidity, it may never dry. So definitely watch your temperature, humidity, and wind speed. And again, our class on whether to stripe and seal coat is excellent for this information. Lastly, I want to go to the DAF scale, and the DAF scale is an awesome tool for you to use. I'm going to put a zip code in here. I'm going to do my old hometown, 40258. All right, so basically when you're seal coat or stripe, you got to know the weather. You got to understand the importance of temperature, humidity, wind speed, sunlight, all those factors. And they all get weighted they all have a certain effect on your seal coating and striping. But if you want to know if you want to seal coat or stripe, it's a great thing to do to come out here, come to this website. It's dafscale.com. All you do is you put in your 5-digit zip code. By the way, this service is free. And we created this a few years ago, found it 97% accurate, which is pretty cool over an 18-month period. All right, so you look here. This tells you, this is Louisville, Kentucky, my hometown. So the day on average, what's left of the day, is a 7.86 on the scale of 1 to 10. Anytime it's in the green, that means it's a go. You can view the details of the advisory. Now, if you're in Louisville right now, notice something here. It says rain advisory. It's a gray. If it was black, it'd mean that 75% or greater chance of rain, and gray means 35 to 74. But you can see here you've got optimum conditions and humidity of 41%. You've got temperatures of 96. So it says, hey, watch out. It may be a little hot. You may have a situation with the surface temperatures being too hot. So this detail is great. It shows you the rest of the day, and it shows you tomorrow. So this is great. And listen, if you got to do some work during the evening, you can go up here, and you can say DAF by night, and it'll give you the score for the night. And you'll see here, okay, good 7, good 10, starting to tail off there at 1 a.m., still striping. 4 a.m., big problem. You especially watch for your rain again. You're starting to get, I mean, that's really borderline. I would not be striping in these times. I definitely wouldn't be sealing. You might stripe if you can get by with it. But be cautious when you get into that yellow, especially the low yellow. So very cool tool. We go over that in our weather seminar. We get more in the detail of what this is created from and why and so forth. So we'll go back. Again, today's presentation is brought to you by the Medallion product line, both our Gold Series and our Black Series, which is our premium products, premium formulations. And I think Lynn's going to tell us real quickly about an offer that we're making on the ProStripe paint.
Yeah, well, we're waiting for some more questions to come in. We do have quite a few, but I'll go ahead and start submitting those now. I'll give Greg a little bit of a break. Greg, can you go to the next slide?
Yes, I can. There you go.
Okay. The presentation today was being recorded. You'll be receiving a link with that. That particular email with the system that sends the link doesn't allow us to send attachments, so we'll go ahead and send out the charts in a separate email, as well as some more information about our Try It Buy It paint offer. And then if you also are interested in attending some of our upcoming webinars, you can view those. And if you go on to the next slide, Greg, you can by going to pppcatalog.com in the Knowledge Center, and then in the center here at the PPP training webinars, it'll give you a list of what's coming up. That'll be updated with the link to the recording for this presentation as well, so that you can access it there and you can share it with others. And please keep looking back for that. And then we got one more slide. Oh, it's a couple clicks, sorry. I should have taken control again. So our upcoming webinars next week, we do have a Pavement Marking 102, which focuses on thermoplastic, and we will go through some of the inspection methods for that as well, and troubleshooting. Then we have a pavement maintenance webinar coming up that pretty much will go through everything that you need to know about how to maintain your pavement. Then, of course, the weather presentation that Greg kept talking about, and that goes into the 4 factors that greatly affect whether or not it's a good time to stripe or seal. And then we have in September, for the contractors that are on the call, we'll be discussing some great ideas for marketing and expanding your business. So let's see, we do have quite a few questions that have came in this time. So first up, Greg, can you give us what is the best way to remove traffic paint off of asphalt?
Okay. All right. First, I do want to make a comment on this last slide. Listen, you guys out there, if you attended the 101 course, you get 50% off the thermal class. So I'll give you all a minute to think on that one. Also, the pavement maintenance one is great. It's going to go over everything from potholes to gator cracking and all that. So that's an awesome one as well. Okay, so the question was, how do you get paint off of thermoplast? The best way, well,
off of asphalt.
I'm sorry, off of asphalt. My bad. All right, same thing. I'm gonna tell you the same answer for both concrete and asphalt. So there's a couple primary ways that's being done. You either grind it off or you hydroblast it off. That's the primary methods that's used and prescribed. I suggest hydroblasting is about a $750,000 machine, or you have a minimum cost of a local hydroblaster to come out with a 40,000 plus, probably more 75,000 these days, PSI machine, large truck, and they put it out. And it does work. It works very well. It doesn't damage the asphalt, and it removes the materials, of course, if it's operated right. So make sure you get a reputable guy. The other method, do not try to use a 4,800 psi pressure washer. You're going to trash the asphalt. It will not work. Go with a grinder. I do not really recommend a drum grinder. We sell both drum and rotaries. For drum grinding or for pavement marking removal off of asphalt, if you use a drum grinder, it will create what I call a mill mark. I highly recommend a rotary grinder. There's a couple made out there. Again, ours is Smith, absolutely the best machine made out there. And it's the Smith Eraser LNX8. And it actually, what it does again is that when it grinds, it rotates. Instead of spinning like a drum vertically, it goes horizontally. That's right. It goes horizontally, and it creates a feathered edge. So you literally kind of erase this line, and it does very minimal damage to your surface. So that's the two ways: either grinding or hydroplastic. Next question.
Great. What kind of cleaner do you recommend for clogged tips?
Clogged tips. Well, first of all, if we're mostly talking about airless machines here, so I would take those tips as soon as I'm finished using them. I would have like a old, gosh, we don't even have coffee cans anymore, but that's what we used to use. So you have a coffee can with a lid on it. You throw that. Just throw it in some water. If you just throw it in water, it should do fine if you do it immediately. If it's clogged to the point that obviously it's dry, water's not going to dissolve it. So then you would go to like a mineral spirit. But be careful. Remember, that's plastic on that tip, and that could wear. So just be aware of that.
Okay. And how often do you recommend we replace an airless machine?
Ooh. My experience, sharing experience here, well, I've seen some airless machines that have lasted 15 years, but most really you're talking about 3 to 5 years. What you want to do, it depends on how much you use them, but what you want to make sure that you do is that if you begin having pump rebuild issues, which are popular with some units, and other units you don't. I found that the hydraulic pumps last longer. They're more durable. They pump more paint. That's the ones I always recommend, and they don't need repairs as often. But really, it gets down to the things that go wrong with airless machines is the wheel bearing in the front. It starts getting squirrely on you, and your lines look funky because the airless are so precise. You'll have the pump rebuild is really the pain in the butt, and that's the one that can cause you to actually just go ahead and get a new one. So I rarely see machines last more than 5 years when we're talking about airless machines. Air machines, I see them, I don't even stock an air machine. I'm sitting here promoting these things. We do sell them, we just don't stock them. But air machines will last forever. Airless machines, you get good 5 years out of them. Now, there'll be some people out there that'll say that, oh, I get a lot more. But usually they're about time to replace them, especially if they're used by multiple users.
Okay.
Next question.
How do you measure wet mills of paint?
You're going to use a wet mill gauge, and it's a simple gauge. It looks like it's about the size of a credit card. You can keep it in your pocket or in your wallet and take it out, and you put it down on the paint. And you see what level that paint comes up to. It's a great way to do it. Sometimes if you have a rough texture of pavement that you're putting the paint on, you might want to put a piece of aluminum, or I wouldn't put cardboard because cardboard can be impressed. A hard, rigid thing that you can just kind of drive over with the paint machine and just get a good sample of it as well. So yeah, that's how you would do it. You'd use a wet mill gauge. If you need those, you can give us a call and we can or email us and we can probably get you one.
Okay. This next question I think should be asked in conjunction with another one. So they're asking how fast or slow you would have to walk to maintain 15 to 25 mils. And then we also have someone asking what's a good method of trying out spray machines to make sure it's operating correctly before beginning. So I think you could probably answer both of those at the same time.
Yeah, it's all about how fast and slow you're walking, and of course the tip orifice size and so forth. The best way really is to measure it. Have your guy do some lines. Remember that that your lines, and this is a phenomena that's just happens, is in the morning your lines are thinner, in the evening your lines are thicker, and that's usually because of fatigue on the operator. So you'll have a thicker line at the end of the day and a thinner line in the beginning of the day. So you know, you do need to kind of monitor that throughout the day, but the best way is a wet mill gauge. You'll run that over something and you'll check it. And again, if the paint's too thick, if you're putting down too much, you can lose a lot of money in paint very quickly. I'm sorry, what was the tail end one there?
It's basically the one question was, what would be a good method of trying out spray machines to make sure it's operating correctly?
Yeah, thank you. We talked about tar paper earlier. That's a great thing to have on your truck at all times. A roll of tar paper, you can get it from your local hardware store. Put it down. You definitely need to do this before you start striping. It just makes it so much easier. You don't have an area that you have to worry about covering up or anything like that. Not even blackout to do. But definitely take a piece of tar paper, put it down on a piece of cardboard, and just run the machine. That way you can check. You can check the tar paper is a little harder, so you can actually do a wet mill gauge check on that one. But you want to check for width and check for thickness. That's the best way to do it. And you will have your guns go out of adjustment as you store them and haul them around and so forth. So you might want to check every time beforehand. Okay,
just a couple more.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. We'll forget. I apologize for going so far over, but I hope it's been beneficial to all you guys. I see we're maintaining about everybody that came on board is still there. So thank you very much for your patience. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Is the retroreflectometer that you showed the same machine that is used for signs?
Retroreflectivity, we actually have some workshops on that. That's actually run by Steve Norcus. He's our expert in that industry. No, absolutely not. They're two different measurement devices because they're two different measurement angles that are needed to determine their reflectivity. Because remember, you're looking at a sign perpendicular to your view, or you're looking at it in a flat position toward you. When you're looking at a stripe, you're looking at a totally different angle than you look at a sign. So in order to understand or to get an equivalent real-life reflectivity, they have to use two different angles, and one machine can't do that much of a variable of an angle.
Okay. And what do you recommend to help prevent slip and fall suits? And this will be our last question.
Yeah. For you guys that stayed on, this is important. I'm glad it was asked. I've actually been asked to be a witness on a couple occasions recently on slip and falls. One was on a ramp and one was on a fire lane situation, and both of them in parking lots. They painted the ramp. Understand that any time that you add a product to the surface, especially a paint that flows like it does, it's going to make that surface smoother and smoother and smoother. In the case of the ramp, we had material go on, and then they applied more material on it and more material, and before you know it, you got to be careful. It can become a skating rink. So you have to be very cautious about that, and also when you do lines out in anywhere that there's pedestrian foot traffic, you should be careful. In fact, a lot of states are now requiring that there is some type of slip-resistant product put in. What I recommend, and it's on our pails, that if you're going to put it in an area that's going to have a lot of foot traffic, that you use an aggregate like a silica sand. We use a number 7 standard silica sand. It's kind of a clear product or a beige product, so it doesn't change the color. It also provides for, it's small enough that it won't roll out. That's the other issue that you have to be concerned with. There's another product out there that we do not sell. I think it's called Shark Bite, Shark Teeth, something of that sort. It says Shark. And it's basically, it looks like to me to be a ground-up silica or ground-up sand, and it's etchy, very, has a lot of dimension to it. So they'll throw that on. A lot of the stripers are using that, and I would highly recommend anytime you do it, you put stuff on a walking surface. Protect yourself, protect your owner. Even tell the owner and charge him for it. But if you're a contractor, of course. hey, we need to put this stuff down, or I highly recommend putting this stuff down. But in the end, you could be liable for it. At least in these two cases, they went after the pavement marking company. So please be cautious of that, and that will reduce your slip fall just by at least making the effort and recording that you made the effort would be a good idea. Okay?
All right, well, thank you very much, Greg. And then thank you, everyone, for attending and for staying on board. I know we went way over on the time, and hopefully it was beneficial to you. We did have a couple other questions that we're just we're going to go ahead and answer via email instead. So if you are one of those people that asked those, they're more specific, and we'll get you those answers as soon as possible, I promise. And it's just thank you once again. Make sure to check out pppcatalog.com/webinars for other upcoming webinars that we have, and we hope to see you online again soon.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.